All right. Well, welcome back. Good to have you. Our brother survived the bison experience. So that's not bad, right? Tell us about your hotel experience. Muy bien. Uh, do they have a church? Okay. Okay. Good. Good. It'll be fun. Good. I know Ryan had a good experience. Good bed and breakfast. Always, right? Yeah. Good. Jerry, were you fishing this morning to get your breakfast? This Jerry was watching the turkeys fan out. Well, the Jerry in the back, but you happen to be in the exact same line of sight. We're very efficient here. You put the Jerrys in the same line of sight, we can talk to them both at the same time. Yeah, that's good. Well, awesome. Well, let's open with prayer and give the mic back to Tim. Today, he's going to open the morning by talking about, first of all, based upon what we talked about yesterday, what are ways that the maturity matters members can make a real impact in making disciples in the church. That'll be his focus. And then we'll break, and then he'll focus on younger, newer members in a church. What is their role as well? And that's a good chance for some practical interaction too. So let's open with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for, once again, the privilege of learning from your word and from the experience of others. Help us to apply what we hear to our lives and to our church settings. May each church and each individual be impacted and learn how to take our next steps in following Christ. May none of us be willing to remain where we're at, standing still, but desiring to move forward, intending to depend upon you to take that step in the days and the weeks ahead. Would you encourage us to be praying for someone that we can be reaching for you, someone we can be teaching, and someone that we can be learning from? May we be committed to that. We pray this in your name. Amen. Tim?
Good morning again. Thanks for coming back. Looks like almost everybody, maybe plus a few. How's it going? You weren't here yesterday. What's your name? Landon, nice to meet you. Do you go to church here? Okay, well, hey. Young dude on a Saturday morning. What do you do for work? I'm an actuary. You are an actuary, okay. Good. Very good.
You know what that is, right?
Yeah. I did in watching Charles Dickens. Yeah. Is it the same? All right, let's go to 1 Timothy 5 this morning. My burden for people over 60 years old, 60 and more in our church, was really more caught than taught in my boyhood years. My dad had a unusual propensity to love and respect the wiser people of our church, and I just watched him listen, and I watched him love and care. and which was fascinating to me because I think it was an act of God's grace in his heart. My grandfather, my dad's dad, he was the head usher at Old Moody Church under Harry Ironside years ago. And my great-grandfather died in a farming accident. I won't describe the accident, it was quite gruesome, but he had passed away, and back in the day, the oldest kid came home and helped mom take care of the farm. And he did, but my great-grandmother was clear as ice and just as cold avowed atheist. And my grandpa never returned from his early 20s until he passed away at 84. He never walked with God again. When my dad came to know Christ as his Savior, playing basketball at Kent State University and running track there, he did that pendular swing, out of the world into Christ, and everything old was passed away, all things were become new, and he felt like he should maybe head into the ministry, and went home and told his dad, and his dad promptly removed him from the home. So it's kind of a bizarre thing, from being a head usher at Old Moody Church to, and my grandmother's parents, the Narrows, I knew them. They did not walk with God. So my dad's grandparents, no one walked with God. My dad's father kicked him out of the house. I think my dad had every reason in the world to despise elderly people, but he didn't. It was the antithesis of that, his affection for older people. I just watched. And when I was a little boy, pastor's kids' age, below Joshua, my dad started taking me on visits with him to see elderly people. And I could just remember two things. I know this is going to sound really, really weird. I remember how bad the nursing home smelled and how well my dad loved. That's all I remember. And so as I became his assistant for a decade and a half and continued to watch him, that became quite a thing in my life, especially when we started to venture into exploring what this disciple-making culture was. Because I had really had do you remember George W. Bush's wife and the no student, no child left behind? That was her. Every president's wife has a thing. Do you remember that? I just kind of remember that in my own ecclesiology. Like, if something's God's will, there should be, no soul left behind. That's what I called it for our church. People are saved, they're spirit-filled, they're good people, they're faithful people. Really, I honestly, in all pragmatism, I actually have a job because I'm standing on the shoulders of people old enough to be my parents and grandparents. And so why in the world would I want to disrespect, any of these dear saints? So when we started to go into this disciple-making culture, those over 60 were the most for it, but the most afraid of it. That's how I could explain it at Grace Church. They were the most for it, but they were the most afraid of it. Why would you think that might be the case? It's also been the case in numerous other churches that we've done the seminar with. Why would you think that would be the case? Most for it, but the most fearful of it. Pushes them out of their comfort zone. They've got some established routines, maybe. Okay?
Our current society is downplaying the value of our elderly. They're minimizing their value. And it kind of wears on you. I'm of no use anymore.
That was a big deal for our people.
I bet.
Yeah. I didn't even know it. I didn't know because I knew how well my dad had loved them, but I didn't know how much the outside influence had made them feel. Okay, anyone else? Not for us. No, it's still not. You know, our folks know our philosophy of worship, and, you know, there's nothing in our service that the world would recognize in sound or content, nor will there ever be. Maybe the C word, maybe it appeared, and I know for some it did, change, that would change word. In our area, that's really, you know, somewhat of a 5-letter cuss word for folks over 60.
So what were the changes that shocked them?
Well, we're going to talk about it. I think the announcement, not the announcement, but even the gradual explanation of something that's a little bit out of their routine from normal, even if it's a church routine. If we're not bothering their Monday to Saturday much, but how they're in a groove, they're in a faithful groove in the local church. So I would say the change potentially of what is this, and maybe why are we doing this? The why was the biggest, because people over 60 automatically think, Pastor Thomas and I were talking about this yesterday, and a little bit this morning. Are you going to about to tell us we've been doing things wrong for a long time? And that's not it, right? I would tell them we're actually able to explore this because of all the right things that you have been doing, right? But I need to know how fast or slow this should go from you, not from the younger people. And the second thing was, intellectually, they didn't think they could do it, which was fascinating to me. I would say those two for us were the most significant things. The why, and we're going to talk about that. That's the main part of this hour together. The why and maybe the how. The what, I think the content, I think they know, they all knew. They just didn't understand that we weren't going to ask them to stand up and teach a class. We weren't going to ask them to go get another degree at 75 years old. You know, we're not going to ask them to start taking courses for credit. You know, they were, yeah. But anyways, as I was in the pastorate and studying God's Word more, and I did a little series on the pastorals, and we went through 1 Timothy, and 1 Timothy 5 was just probably because, like what I said about my dad, my history with older people just really cemented in my heart what I would always be and what I would always do in relationship to the necessary, spirit-filled, aged soul in my assembly. And I guess one of the reasons why this text became so valuable to me is because, unfortunately, I did see a lot of younger pastors my age not doing this. And that really grieved my heart. And what grieved my heart more was this. It wasn't that the younger pastors weren't doing this about things that were... When a younger pastor does something that's right, and he gets pushback from older folks, this is the way he should respond. When a younger pastor does something pragmatic or something I would call unnecessary, or maybe even wrong for a church, and he gets pushback from the older people, this is the way he should act. So, a lot of guys were taught, do what you feel God wants you to do and be willing to lose your hundreds to gain your thousands. And to me, when I think of Proverbs 6 and God's words to Jeremiah, it's very, Judgment Day is going to be tough for anyone who unnecessarily divides God's body. I just ain't going there. Anything God calls an abomination is pretty stiff stuff. That ain't going to be me. So whether they're doing something right and they get a bad reaction, or if they're doing something wrong or unwise and a bad reaction, they still need to act like this. My friends, a lot of my friends, were kind of like, no, this is what we're doing. And they did it quickly. And it really didn't matter to them who left, because they felt this is what God's will was and this is what the church needs to do. Now, that may be true. It could have been what God wanted for that church. But for Grace Church, we felt it was God's will, and there was some gentle pushback. And we were going to take our time. And so what we set out to be a slow process became even a slower process because of our folks over 60. But Paul tells Timothy, do not sharply rebuke an older man, but rather appeal to him as a father, to younger men as brothers, to older women as mothers, and the younger women as sisters in all purity. And then you're all very familiar with what Paul calls widows indeed. Do you remember what a widow indeed was? How could we define a widow indeed? Over 60, for sure, 60 and more. She fit the qualifications, which were very much like 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 qualifications for pastors, right? And no living male relative, right? As far as I understand it. She could have daughters, but no living male relative, because that's who their caretakers were back in the day before Social Security and all the helps we have today. They had nothing, and so they would move in with the kids, or the kids would move in with them and take care of them. But anyways, the widows indeed are part of this group of people that deserve respect. Now, as you move forward slowly, according to a position that's right and a disposition that looks like this, there still could be a stinker or two in that bunch. And we had two, and it was a married couple, Jack and Carol Lego. And they were very much adored saints in our church. And so when we set out to do this very slowly, I would get permission. I know this sounds really, really weird. I wouldn't take a next step in building our disciple-making culture without the permission of our Maturity Matters group. When I make big decisions at Grace Church of Mentor, my admin process is different than a lot of places. And if it's something I believe the Lord's put on my heart, I talk to our elders first, and then our deacons second, and I'll go to our Maturity Matters group third, and then I'll go to our Life in the Middle group, which is our 45 to 60 people. And then I'll go to our Home Builders group, and then I'll go to our Young Marrieds group, and then I'll go to our First 5 Years group, and then I'll go to the youth group, and then I'll go to the junior high class, and then I'll go to the 5th and 6th grade, 3rd and 4th grade, 1st and 2nd grade, and I go all the way down to the kindergartners when it's a big decision. And we go slow, and no soul left behind. Every born-again, spirit-filled saint from a 5-year-old up deserves to be heard, in my opinion. So right now we're going through a building project, and that's the way we're making the decision. Right? And if it doesn't get past the deacons, we stop and we go back and we retool it. If it doesn't get past the Maturity Matters, we stop, we go back and we retool it. Because I don't want to be like Rehoboam of old. Remember when he listened to the counsel of the young men over the older men, and it kind of messed up Israel a bit for a time? I don't want to be that guy. So a little bit of an Old Testament allusion there and a New Testament description of how we should handle these sweet folks. But Jack and Carol, we were made this big decision. We had walked it through the whole church, and we had gotten started. We went at the pace that the Maturity Matters thought we should go, with elder and deacon approval. And they were still faithful, but they were still very much voicing their opinion. They weren't against the whole disciple-making thing. They really had heartburn over allowing people to disciple one another during prayer meeting, and then in time during Sunday school, and then Sunday evenings. Could you tell me why they might have been upset with that? We told them we were going to do this, but when we started out, why would they be upset?
Feel like they're neglecting prayer, neglecting the study, Bible study, Sunday school lesson, they'll miss it.
To them, this was very much a move into a contemporary culture without changing the music, so to speak, on a Sunday morning service. This was devaluating prayer, devaluating study, because no one could really know the word as well as the pastor who was teaching it and applying it. We're taking away from the spiritual muscle of the church. Okay? It took, what I told them was that our disciple makers on Wednesday nights, and I always told them thank you. Thank you, Jack and Carol, for sharing that. I'm hearing you. Our disciple makers on Wednesday nights, though, we give them all prayer folders. All the prayer folders that people in the auditorium get for prayer meeting, everyone out in the lobby gets. And we ask them to start with prayer before they study. And I said, Mr. and Mrs. Lego, you've known me since I was a boy, and I'm just going to shoot straight with you here. We call it our midweek Wednesday prayer service. But Mr. and Mrs. Lego, how much time have we really invested in prayer on Wednesday nights over the last 20 years? Isn't it really another preaching night where we happen to pray instead of a prayer night where we happen to preach? And I said, I want you to do something. Stay out in the lobby next week and just watch the people who are discipling and see how long they pray. Then come into the auditorium and compare that to how long we pray. Okay. And their response was, the third week, Pastor, we need to pray more in the auditorium. I was like, yep. And so we really want to do that. But give me a chance here. I was newer to the senior pastorate, and I was just like, we're going there. I said, we just can't. You can't spin the ship's wheel. It's just 1 degree every day at a time. And that's agonizingly slow. I get it. But as long as we're headed towards where we want to go. So when we added Sunday night, the argument was the same for preaching as it was for prayer. That was a harder one to convince them. It really was. And I had to do something with what they were saying, because we were allowing people to get one less preaching time a week. Was this a problem? What was the long-term consequences for that as a church? Were we going to have a less theologically robust church because people were missing preaching? So we sat down together and we talked, and we started to just look at the attendance of our people. Right? On Sunday nights, you really had the core of the core of the core. These were the most theologically robust people that were just used to being faithful on Sunday nights and getting another good expository sermon. We were not tapping into the non-Sunday night attender. We just weren't. So that was a factor. I told them that we would, for free, begin to give each person discipling on a Sunday night a copy of the sermon that they were missing. Right? We told them that we would open up the building at 5 o'clock if they wanted to disciple for an hour before our 6 o'clock evening service. And we told them that we would leave it open for an hour after our evening service. So if they wanted to get the preaching, please do. The last thing I want to do, please understand how I say this. The highest human court that we have on earth is a spirit-filled conscience. Notice I said it's not the conscience, but a spirit-filled conscience. And I'm not going to trample on the spirit-filled conscience of reasonable people. And so that's what we did. We felt like the disciple making was good. It had to happen. We didn't want to unnecessarily step on toes, so we kept the building open those times. We offered free copies of the sermons. And that seemed to settle Jack and Carol. Now understand, going along, they're the only two older people that we really got pushback from. By that time in a group of Maturity Matters is probably 40, 45 strong. There's just two. But they mattered to me. Their maturity mattered to me. I know they mattered to our flock. These people had the gift of hospitality. They were having more people into their home, ministering to them by providing food for them, praying with them, than any other older couple in our church. If I move too fast, unreasonably so, pragmatically so, and we lose them, we lose a lot more. Because it would have looked like Pastor Tim just really didn't care for the Legos. He got to do what he got to do. And that was not going to happen. And I told him that. I said, Mr. and Mrs. Lego, I'm not losing you over this. I'm hearing you. So you give me your wisdom. If this is biblical, we've got to do it. You give me your wisdom. And they did. And that's what we did with Sunday nights. When we added Sunday school, we didn't get pushback from them because they had learned how we handled the prayer time and how we handled the evening, and Sunday school was okay for them. One of the sweetest times in my pastoral ministry is when, a few years into this, I went to Jack and Carol, and I said, "What do you think?" And they said, "It's going okay. It's going okay." And a few weeks later, Jack came up to me and he goes, "There's this new couple that's been coming to church, and we've been sitting by them, and we kind of asked them if they wanted to go through the Foundations book with us. What do you think?" I was just like, "That'd be awesome." And then Carol said, she kind of went like this. She goes, "Pastor, we're going to do it on a Wednesday night, and we're going to have them in our home." And I just laughed and gave him a big hug. And she goes, "But we're going to pray. We're going to pray in our home before we study." I said, "I have no doubt in my mind. They're just not comfortable coming to church on a Wednesday night yet. We got them on a Sunday morning." So anyways, they're both home with Jesus now, but they became really two of our most effective disciple makers. Joyfully so, participating in good news testimonies, so proud of these kids as if they were their own, It took a while, but it was worth it. It was worth it. Not just the why, but like we said earlier, I can't do this. I can't do this. Back in the early days, I tell the story when we were learning and getting permission from our deacons to head into whatever this disciple-making culture was. I said, "I don't know what I don't know. I see what my Bible says. I see the life of Christ, and I see how he did it. And I know he tells us to go and be disciple makers as fishers of men. And I see what Paul says about equipping the saints to do this kind of work of the ministry, to be not just painting, mowing, sweeping, cleaning, teaching, singing, but be healthy, not just busy, but healthy." But I don't really know next steps. So do you mind if I call some churches to see who has a disciple-making culture? And the deacons, they were with us, so they said, well, sure. You go ahead and start making your calls. And I called about 300 churches, many of whom that I knew, and asked them what they did for discipleship. And most of them, they're all good people. There's no criticism here. Most of the people say, yes, we do it, and I disciple my people 4 times a week when I preach or teach. That was a real statement from the majority. There were 2 churches out of hundreds that said when someone gets saved in an event-based evangelistic outreach, we will put them, if it's a lady with a lady, to study through a Bible study book, or a man with a man. One church was using 1 by 1 at that time. I don't even know if that's still in print. If it is, I think it's called something else now. At another church back in that time, that's when a guy named Jim Berg, his book called Basics for Believers had just come out. And they were using that book. I said, well, what happens after they go through that book? When do they go through that book? Well, on their own time. And what happens after that? Well, hopefully they're baptized, they become members, and they're serving in the local church. I said, okay, what happens after that? And they said, that's that. That's that. I said, okay, thank you. I came across the church in Kansas City, Missouri. A friend of mine said, I think you need to go call them, and I think you need to go see them. I think they're more along the lines of what we've been talking about. He's one of the elders in our church. And so I called them and got permission to go down to talk to their discipleship pastor. And we talked for a little bit in the morning. He invited me back that night on a Monday night to a gymnasium there they had. And he said, you're not going to really understand this until you see it. So I showed up at the gymnasium. We talked for a little bit in the lobby, and we went around to the side door, double doors, and he pulled them open. And the gym was just full of people sitting at typical 8-man church table, 4 couples at each table, and the only thing in between each couple was the scriptures and then a Bible study book. And very good acoustics in a gymnasium. It was very loud. It was actually quite a glorious sound. I can't really explain it. And I got tears in my eyes, and I looked at him. I was like, is what's going on here what I think's going on here? And he said, yeah. He said, these people meet here every Monday night. It's packed. And these are people studying the Word with people they've won to Christ in town, or they're studying with one another as members on their way to winning someone Christ in town. And then when they do, they bring that person in to study the milk of the Word together, and they grow them. And we've written 16 books, and we've provided for them what they're going to study, because this is not the why, but this is the how part. Maturity Matters people were scared to death that they didn't have the intellectual capacity to grow somebody. And they didn't have the strength to study, right? And so that was it for me. The environment, they provided the space, they provided the time, they provided the resources. And then that just clicked with me as far as equipping the saints to do the work of ministry of growing each other up into a fuller understanding of who Jesus is. So that was a great visit. We got permission to ask them to use those 16 books. And we brought those 16 books back to Grace. And then we set up our own process, which we would go through during a normal seminar. It's in your notes. You can read it on your own. And we took our 7th grade on up for 9 months through those 16 books. We did it in the school year. So junior high Sunday school all the way through Maturity Matters, Sunday school teachers, we got them together. We said, hey, look, we'd just like to study these 16 books. Let's let these books be our curriculum for 16 months. And they did. And at the end of those 16 months, during that time, we were preaching through 1 Thessalonians. And at the end of that 9 months, we asked for how many people would just like to take the next step of figuring out what this journey was. And that's when those 30 people came to us and said, we'd like to help figure it out. And then we took those 30 people. That was our first Wednesday night time. And we just paired them up. We didn't know what we were doing. We just paired them up. Because what I realized as a pastor is a lot of people weren't studying the Bible in their home with their families. And so they hadn't certainly been doing it at church in more of an intimate environment. So we just had to get people used to studying the Bible together. I mean, this is how green everything was. We're far away from where we are now, you know. And that's what happened on that Wednesday night. People were scared to death to sit down and actually just study the Bible with somebody, but at least we gave them what to study. They didn't have to come up with it on their own, you know. And they did. They dove into it. And pretty quickly, what this gal said last night about, you know, everyone settling and being comfortable with that. It happened pretty quickly. Then things just kind of grew out of there, and that's not what we're here for now. But in this hour, the Maturity Matters, when they had those 16 books, and they didn't have to dig up the material, find the material thoroughly, you know, that settled their hearts. It settled their hearts. But what happens when we're done with those 16 books, right? Well, going through those 16 books, that church was theologically a bit different than we were. And so we had made some approved edits that fit more of our language of soteriology and ecclesiology and so forth. But we decided to write our own. And so our staff got together and we wrote what's now called the Foundations book. And then people began to study those. But then when they were done with those, our theology told us that this had to be life on life for life. Well, 16 books, disciple making is not bound up in a volume. So we wrote another book called The Walk. And if you get on our website, you can see all these. Thomas knows about these. These are resources you can even purchase with your own church logo on them. Call them your own. We don't care. But there's 12 more lessons. 10 more lessons we wrote. Taking people from milk to meat and everything in between. And we've written a few other resources in the meantime. But that's what settled our Maturity Matters people. Had to clear their conscience regarding prayer and worship. Had to clear their conscience regarding why. Right? Had to go slow, and then had to clear their conscience in relationship to giving them resources. That they just basically had to show up, open, and study. Now, in our Foundations and Walk material, there's a question asked at the end of every chapter. It says, do you feel like you know this well enough where you could teach it to somebody else? Right? That's a big question for a lot of people. And sometimes they say no, so they go back and they do that lesson again because no one's in a hurry. It doesn't mean that you have to do 12 lessons for 1 hour a week for 12 weeks. This is the opposite of institutionalism. You take your time. We started out that way and found out that was an epic fail. We're going to do one book a week for 16 weeks, the books we bought back from Kansas City. And after the first week, everyone's like, we didn't even get into the study, Pastor Tim. We're just talking and praying. Is that bad? It's like, no, I don't think so. I'm learning this with them, because I came out of degrees and schedules and programs, and it seemed a little odd to me, but then I'm seeing fellowship, literal. I'm seeing having all things in common. I'm seeing people laughing and crying together and praying together, and I'm like, wow, this is a quantum leap, right? But whatever you do, try to get a little bit of the book done every week. Okay. And they did. And now people are moving along. We have one Maturity Matters lady. She's 84 years old. If I had the money, I would put these people on a plane with me and take them everywhere I go, because you're going to learn more from these people about a disciple-making culture you'd ever learn from me. I would put Liz Romero up here, and she would show you her Foundations book, and she would tell you, I've gone through this 60 times. with 60 different people. It looks like a tattered old Bible, right? And she would hold up her Bible, which looks more tattered than her foundations book, and she goes, this is the foundation, and this is how we get helped. And then we go. And she's 84 going on 34. She's just become quite a lighthouse for other elderly ladies in our church. But I would say now, over 20 years into this, that our most active disciple-making group in our church are our folks over 60. It didn't start out that way. They were the least, and now they're the most. And that's changed the disposition and the position of our church absolutely completely. And because of the way we administrate and how we make big decisions from the top down, so to speak, the top of the maturity ladder down, it's given our younger people in the church a revived respect and affection for our older people. And as I said yesterday, now it's very much a thing where younger people are looking for help to older people. And birthed out of that came a Titus 2 table talk dinner. I don't know if you're familiar with Luther's Table Talk. Have you ever read that? Luther had a guest in his home, somewhat of maybe a Theophilus for Luke. And Luther would give a little challenge to his family every night at dinner, and it's called Luther's Table Talk. And Luther didn't know it, but this guy was scribing under the table everything that Luther said, and later he put it into a book. And I read that book, and I thought, wow, as this thing was growing at Grace Church, this fond affection for Titus 2 people and this coming together, I thought, wow, it would be really cool to have a Titus 2 table talk dinner of our older with our younger. So that's the biggest event for our youth group every year now. You would think it would be going to Cedar Point and riding roller coasters or going on the youth retreat, camping or whatever. The biggest event for our teenagers every year is the Titus 2 table talk dinner. Every kid in our church now has a spiritual grandparent, right? And they have dates throughout the year, and they pray and they study with each other. They're always available. And then that expanded. The college and career group got jealous. So every year the college and career group, all right, they go to the Cleveland Orchestra concert. They go to Severance Hall, downtown Cleveland, and they have a concert date. And that's the biggest event of the year for our college and career. And they all get dates with our Maturity Matters folks. And they all drive down together. They have a big dinner, and then they go to a concert. And they just did this a couple weeks ago. And it just lights up our whole church. It lights up our whole church. No soul left behind. And it's absolutely necessary and valuable. Those are the practical things that are really the overflow of disciple making in our Maturity Matters people's lives. Yes, sir.
So how did you get?
Can we get a microphone so we can hear?
Yes, I believe we have one.
I have.
There you go. Thank you.
This is an example of listening to our older members. Stephen?
Went to get some coffee.
Okay, so question is, how did you get that part of your church to take that step towards the younger people? To create those relationships? Did you just assign them and hope that they happen? Did the older members choose young people? How young did you go? How did you get there?
Sure. That original group of 30, 29 of them were women. Several of them were Maturity Matters people. And we took those ladies. This was people like Barb Hickson, people like Kay Bear, Linda Gray. And we put them with younger gals in that group just because it worked. I wish I could say we were wise enough to know where we were going at that point. But the relationships of those ladies with those younger ladies was really ended up being the epicenter of what people saw. And then when we had those ladies start to give what's the good news about the good news testimonies publicly, with their disciplee standing next to them, that was part of the caught part. And then it just effervesced from there, slowly effervesced from there. And those ladies, really Linda, Barb, Kay, they started inviting other ladies into their groups that were younger. Then Rosie Mastropetro, then Sharon Badig, right? Then Liz Ramura, and so on and so on and so on. It just became Bev Siebert, Laverne Miazzi. I mean, they just kept watching, hearing, getting invited, coming, and growing, and then doing it themselves. And it is a very robust group of students of the Word that have huge hearts for lost people. And they could take up an hour with good news testimonies if just that group of ladies were here. But it started on that Wednesday night, and we just pragmatically paired up people to study. We didn't know how it was going to go. But I think because I feel the Lord was behind it, He gave momentum that we didn't know, because we didn't know. I wish I could say I was more polished at how we began, but we just thought it needed to become a thing, and that's what it was. So now a fourth tier, caught and taught, is just a visual. On Wednesday night, Sunday school, and Sunday nights, when people walk into the lobby and they see these elderly folks shepherding younger people. And a fifth tier vision, is obviously the Titus 2 table talk dinner and the big Severance concert. And like I said yesterday, now we have younger people asking not just for a discipler, but for a spiritual grandparent. It just evolved. I don't know how to tell you. It just evolved that way, but very, very much from grassroots, not top down. A lot of these people did it on their own, which was a blessing. Because I never had to worry about what they were studying because we had provided it for them,
What does that table talk format look like when you do it
Sure,
at your church?
sure. At first, we assigned kids, because I started it when I was the youth pastor my last couple of years, and we assigned kids to grandparents. Now it's much more organic than that. When they arrive for this dinner, they have, every kid in our youth group has a youth discipler that works with their parent, right? Because it's the parent's job to oversee the discipleship of their kids, but our youth do that. And then the youth group people work with our youth pastor and the parents as far as attaching a spiritual grandparent to their kid. If their parents don't come to the church, whether they're saved or unsaved, we call the parent to get permission for one of the youth leaders to disciple their kid. Don't ever not do that. We just had a pastor in our area lose a $3 million lawsuit because their parents were sent a link of a recording of their 16-year-old daughter being baptized in a morning service by one of their friends who were watching the live stream, and she had not been given permission to be baptized from her parents. Genuinely saved, being discipled by the youth group leader, and the parents sued the church and they won. So just be really careful when you start to attach your kids with people to disciple them. And it's worked out to be great opportunities to give the gospel with even unsaved parents. We want to, when they see that you're bowing your knee to respect them as their child's parent in that way, that's a big deal. And most of them say yes. Whereas before they would probably come in and just yank them out and say, "What are you doing? You never told me you were doing this." But anyways, nonetheless, we started it by assignment. Now it's much more organic than that. They'll come. We have it in the summertime now. We have a big tent outside. We put round tables like we ate at dinner last night, and there's 8 per table. And I don't know, there's probably 150 or so youth group and elderly folks out there, and we provide a catered dinner for them. We don't want our people to have to work to get this done. We want to gift this to our people. So we put it in our budget, and I think this last year we have a place down the street called Mission Barbecue. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Mission Barbecue. It's all owned and operated by vets. 10% of their proceeds go to wounded warriors. Every day at noon they stand and everyone in the store sings the national anthem. And They give veterans discounts, and it's just a phenomenal concept. And the food's just really ridiculously good. So we had them cater it, and their staff came down and served our people, and then they sit down, and Pastor Steve, who's our youth pastor, he'll kick it off. But then the Maturity Matters people know weeks ahead of time now, we would like you to stand and give a what's the good news about the good news testimony of your own life to model this for the kids. And that takes up all the time, because they go table to table, men, women, and they stand at their table and they share with their kids a neighbor they're trying to reach for Christ, or someone they're studying the Word with, and to keep the kids' eyes looking up and out. And it always includes, at the attachment, a little life lesson, and we want spiritual grandparents to just kind of feel free to do that. If I would have known this when I was your age, or I did know this when I was your age, and it served me well all my days. So it's always good news first, a little practical, I wish I would have known, or this is what I did. And then we finish with a prayer time, and they go home. My kids had Bill and Sandy Cadence as their spiritual. They're both home with Jesus now. But that dinner ended up being really the epicenter for their care for my kids throughout the whole year. Bill and Sandy randomly would show up on our doorstep. There's this little pizza shop in Mentor, and like they're large. The box was like bigger than half of Bill, and he'd show up with a big box of pizza unannounced and just said, "Hey, kids, come on to the front porch. I ain't going to keep you long. Here's a pizza. I just wanted to tell you I love you and pray with you. Pray with them right on the front porch." And he'd leave, right? But I'm telling you what, man, those little acts, random acts of love and kindness attached my kids to that guy's heart. And dude, this guy was, didn't even know who his parents were. He was an orphan kid. He lived in an orphanage. Drug, alcohol addiction. He's tatted up. This guy's in his 70s at this point. An old Navy guy. God wondrously saved him when he got out of the Navy. And this would have been such a simpleton in today's, and his wife Sandy was the same. But yeah, my kids to this day, that was life-changing for them. But it was really born, not out of a program, it was born out of a culture of spiritual reproduction. That's what made it more sustainable.
What would you say to more mature members who feel like they're not interested in showing up at games for young people because they've already done that with their kids?
Mm-hmm.
Not interested in that sort of thing. Or they're just scared to walk up to the teenagers and talk to them. They don't know what to say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I feel compelled as a pastor to create those times. So just like we provided resources so that they would know what to study, for people that are scared, I feel it's my responsibility as overseer to at least provide times for them to get to know each other if they're scared to introduce themselves. But really, everything that happens among our kids and our older people now effervesces out of disciple making. I can't overstate that. Instead of setting a schedule and you go, right? It used to be when I was youth pastor, before this culture became a reality, is, older people would get sports schedules, concert schedules of all of our kids, and there was just no connection, right? But when the disciple making thing started to take root, and the more personal nature of this, the relationship development started around the Word. Now they don't even have to share schedules. Now they just know, and they go. And older people that would never, ever, ever sit through rain and sleet on an early spring baseball game have no problem doing that. Well, they probably do, but they're doing it, It's a tender thing. It's a tender thing. And this may sound really, really odd, but it's very profound to me. When people in our church die, and we have their funerals, when I was growing up as a kid, the elderly people that passed away, If the auditorium was fuller, it was only full of people that were there to laud them for their faithfulness to the Lord as a testimony for them, and that's good. Would never decry that. Now when our older people die, there's 2 more groups showing up. It's all the unsaved people in the community that knew that they loved them, and it's a ton of young people in our church. It's fascinating. It's just the thing. I don't know that, and again, that's just the rearview mirror. I was part of a lot of really good funerals, some really godly people, and we thank the Lord for them. There's just 2 different groups showing up now in addition to those others. And I think it speaks of how they finished. They were very well known in the community as lovers of lost souls. And it's a kind of an aha moment as a pastor. It's kind of like, oh, wow, there's a lot of unsaved people here for this funeral. It's like, that's really cool. You rewind my videotape 40 years. If there were a lot of unsaved people in a funeral for a Christian, people would have second thought their integrity. In my stripe, in the Ohio Bible Fellowship, they would have thought, I'm telling you, as sure as I'm standing here, they would have thought things like, wow, we thought they were godly. And now they were worldly. Look at all of these people here that don't look like us, talk like us, and they're sitting here weeping. Disciple-making culture changes all that. And it's unexpected, God-intended blessing, I suppose, but it's a very real thing. Dan Hornbeck, one of our Maturity Matters guys, got liver cancer and passed away, and a tremendous disciple-making guy. And our church has 4 sections in it. So I suppose not exactly like this, but 4 sections. And the people that he had worked with and then retired with took up probably that whole section over there. Fascinating. Never would have seen that before. But it's pretty much happening with every funeral now of someone that dies over 60. Younger people and unsaved people. Yep.
So are older members taking the young people out to McDonald's and doing Bible studies with them? How does that level of discipleship happen?
Sure. Some of our Maturity Matters were directly connected or connected themselves with younger people and younger people with them to go through our pathway, which we'll show in the next hour. And some of these are simply Maturity Matters relationships. That's what we call them. We call them Titus 2 in our church, Titus 2 relationships. So those are people that already have someone else that's discipling them, and this is the spiritual grandparent layer. So it's both. We have Maturity Matters people discipling younger people. And then they end up being their discipler and their spiritual grandparent. One-stop shop. For a lot of people, it's different. It's the 2. And so the answer is yes to your question. The answer is yes. And regularly so. And to the point now where it's like, Pastor, you're on a need-to-know basis. It's so deep and it's so wide over there, I don't have to be concerned about how it's going. Like Chuck and Nancy Laughlin, they're retirees in our church, and they're robust disciple makers. And I'll go by Chuck and say, Chuck, how's it going with Ola and Timmy? And a younger couple from Uganda in our church. And he goes, I'll let you know if I need you, Pastor. And my heart's like, oh, just tell me how it's going. I want to hear the blessing. And then he will. He's just like, it just goes that well. You know, and this is what we're studying. This is how they're growing. You know, Pastor, pray for us that God will give us wisdom to counsel them in relationship to the behavior of their young boy. And they're struggling with public school or homeschool right now. And in our area, maybe not unlike a lot of areas, it's just everything's just going so fast, you know. So, but instead of bringing them to us for counsel, they're doing it, which is a blessing. But yeah, the pizza happens, the coffee happens. random acts of love and kindness happen all the time. They're unchartable. It's just so natural, it's unchartable. Yes, sir.
The middle-aged, are they actively involved in discipleship, or are they too busy with life?
Now, 80% of our membership is actively involved, all ages. Yep.
Newly married, college age too.
80,
Young people too.
80% of our membership, yes, sir. Yep. And when one of the unexpected God-intended blessings over 20 years into this, it's fascinating. We have almost the exact number of people in every decade of life in our church. It's fascinating to me. When you walk into the back of the auditorium, you know, it's an equal number of maturity matters and then life in the middle and home builders, all the way down to kids. It's fascinating to me. And when guests come uninvited to church and they look around, it's like, because typically what do they see in churches? Yeah. Or younger people, right? The attractional model, lose your hundreds to gain your thousands. It's young people. And there's a barber shop where I go where I've been building redemptive relationships for about 10 years now. And the owner of it, his name's Kelly, and he has a couple other kids that work alongside him. And one of the gals there just was given the lay of the land of the gospel to her and building a relationship with her. Kelly standing next. Kelly's not saved yet. And then the other kid, he's got cut hair. They're listening to our conversation. This wasn't all that long ago. And she goes, you know, she grew up Catholic. And she was just describing to me what she doesn't like in church. And it was fascinating to me. This whole contemporary movement, everything is a fad is going to have an end. It's going to have a beginning, it's going to have an end. And the whole contemporary thing, which was in our day the greatest story ever sold instead of told, right? Up to $8 billion a year industry globally, right? That's coming full circle back around. In our community, it's coming full circle back around to either complete and total abject apostasy because the style overcame the message, right? Or it's coming back to complete and total pragmatism, where even unsaved people that grew up Catholic are seeing it for what it is. I mean, conversation after conversation after conversation. And so our people are just learning, just keep the conversation about Jesus because they've been taught by churches, in evangelical churches in our town, to have the talk be about style and attraction and making you comfortable when you come to church, right? That can't be perpetuated in time, but Jesus can. You know what I mean? And so this girl, she's 25 years old, and she goes, I'll come and study the Bible at your church, but I'm not coming there if the lights are turned down, this is exactly what she said, if you got purple lights and you've got flashing lights and you got any smoke and it's loud music, she goes, I'm not coming. I'm not coming. Well, what I tell her is, listen, I hear you. I hear you. And I was like, I'm not even going to talk about that because that's not at all who we are, what we are, or why we exist. Because what she wanted, what she was familiar with in Roman Catholicism, and Roman Catholics have a lot more understanding of what reverence is in worship than a lot of evangelicals do, right? And by common grace, they do what they can as unredeemed people to keep it different than what the world enjoys, I didn't want to cater to her idea of reverence, and I certainly didn't want to cater to her dislike for that which was everything modern and contemporary and loud and noisy. Because I told her, we're not contemporary and we're not traditional. We just preach Jesus. We want people to understand Jesus. And I told her, quite frankly, I said, in both environments, I'm not really sure if the real Jesus is actually known. I said, there's a lot of false Jesuses preached out there. I said, that's when people turn against Jesus, they're not even turning against Jesus. They're turning against a Jesus that's been created by somebody, but it's not Jesus. We just want you to know him. And we don't want anything contemporary or traditional to be distracting to him or from him. And that's just what's going on in our community. And our people are just more pure light in that regard because they're not inviting people to church. We don't have anything to invite them to as far as a building or a people until they know Jesus, right? Because it's not going to make any sense to them. And so all we can do is love them out there, love them to Christ out there, and then our people, when they invite people to church, they invite them to come and study the Bible with them in the lobby on a Wednesday night, Sunday night, or Sunday school. They don't invite them into a worship service. And so what does that do? Gloria comes every Wednesday night and sits and studies with Lisa Bonema. Gloria's Roman Catholic. And what does Gloria see every Wednesday night? She's this flurry of really active, joyful, loving people. And, you know, before and after the service, she's like, you know, she's kind of like, has her head on a swivel. She sees. By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, by how you love one another. So, you know, that happens. Unsaved people do come to our worship services. Sometimes they come because they're invited by our people, but they have already been invited to Christ. That's what I tell our people. You can invite them, but don't invite them until you first invited them to Jesus. Because it's not my job to win them to Christ when they get there. You know, and they understand that. They're fine with that. But 1 Corinthians 2:14, the natural man can't receive the things of God because they're foolishness to him. Neither can he know them because it requires spiritual discernment. And that word discernment is the Greek word diakrino. It's the same word used in 1 Corinthians 11 when we take the Lord's Supper, right? Judge through your heart. It's the same word used in Hebrews 12:4. The word of God is quick and powerful. Is it 12:4? 4:12. Sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing and dividing of the soul and spirit, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. And diakrino, same thing. They can't discern those things because it requires the Spirit of God that indwells us to be able to discern those things. So if unsaved people do come to church in sound and content, it should be unrecognizable. Can someone get saved in that environment? My goodness, maybe some of you did. Certainly they can. God's arm is not short that he can't save in any environment. But generally speaking, we're just really trying to keep our people focused on what disciple making really is. So yeah, we can answer more questions later. I think it's time for a break on our maturity matters, and we'll head into the next section here. So thank you.
Learning anything? Being encouraged? If you're in that maturity matters or older group stage in life, I want you to know here at Brookdale, we have materials that we have to recommend to give you to use, and we'll keep talking and working to improve that. But we do want you to have opportunities to spend time with our younger people, step out of your comfort zone and know that there are resources for you to use, opportunities, and we'll talk more about that in the future. I think there's going to be some increased opportunities for that in the very, very near future, so stay tuned for that. But if you feel like me, you hear these kind of things, your heart kind of burns a little bit in a positive way when